Yeah, pumped to be here. Talk about Tableau Prep. Yeah, as Nelson mentioned, my wife started a cookie company here locally. We're looking into the option of shipping, but yeah, Official Good Dough is our
There you
company.
go. There you go.
So yeah, but yeah,
Awesome, man.
yeah. So I wanted to kind of use this opportunity to do an interactive session. You can feel free to join along if you want to. We're going to dive into sort of cleaning your first data set and using a data set that we're all familiar with, which is the sample Superstore data set. So let me just share my screen here. All right. So if you want to follow along or just kind of want to take a look at what I'm doing, when you open up Tableau Prep, and I'll go ahead and do it real quick, there is this sample flow down here, this Superstore flow. So all you need to do is open it up and then Control A and delete everything, because we're essentially just going to rebuild this flow, but we're going to do it a little bit better than they've done it because we're awesome like that. So if you don't know what Tableau Prep is or haven't used it before, it is Tableau's sort of effort into the click, the drop and click data engineering, self-service data cleaning. And it's really useful for a host of things. It does its primary task of cleaning the data, engineering these data sources well, but you can use it for a lot of other things too. But let's kind of dive in and see how you would build the sample Superstore data set. If you look over here, you've got your connections pane. They've got the look and feel of it similar to the connections in desktop. If you click this plus button here, you can see all of the connections they have. It looks exactly the same as it does in desktop. And so for this particular data set that we're going to create, we've got CSVs and we've got Excel files. So here we've got CSVs or data sets for each of the order regions. We've got this return table, and there's this quota table for the second half of this flow. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get to the second half of it, but we'll at least get through the first half. So again, if you want to follow along, feel free to do so. I'm going to try to go at like medium speed to leave time to do that. But if you just kind of want to see and look ahead at what I'm going to do, just keep that Superstore flow open. But let's dive into rebuilding it. So, when you're building new data sets, you want to spend time with them. If you know sort of what the end goal is, it's a lot easier. But until you spend time sort of creating the data sets, it's harder to visualize what that end goal is. But we know for sample Superstore, it's a table where we've got order IDs, product IDs. We've got everything at the product level. So products within orders, and we've got the sales. We've got what the product actually is, the region, and all of that. And so since we've got these tables, all of the regions split up into their own tables, we want to combine those together. So we can go ahead and come over here and just drag our tables out onto the pane. So we've got central. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it in the same order that they've got the sample flow. So we've got south, we've got east, we've got west, and we've got central. So here are our 4 inputs. And so you can come here into the input step, and there's things that you could make changes here in the step if you need to. But it doesn't actually show you all of the results. It shows you this kind of little preview of these are the values that are going to be in these columns. It shows you the column types, the field name. And the reason why you see this field name and original field name is first in case you go in and manually rename it. But when you're connecting to your more typical tables in your data warehouses and they've got underscores in them, Tableau will usually automatically rename those fields with capital case and remove the underscores from them. So that's why they keep that original field name there. So if you want to take a look at it, we can click here. By default, the first step is going to be this clean step, which really is just a preview of the data. And so if we look in, it shows us the list view and the tabular view. So we've got the profile pane up here and then the table down here. So the profile pane, this is going to be your most useful asset with Tableau Prep, no matter what you're trying to do. Because if you've looked at the tables before, or you've looked at reports with your data before, and you kind of have a feel for this is normally where values fall within, that's what this pane does. It shows you a distribution of the values. So for the quantity field, since this is a number, it's showing a distribution of how many records are falling within this range of values. And then what it's even more useful for is for your string values like these, it shows you how many times that value is appearing in the data set. So let's say over here for order ID, if this was something that I knew this needs to be a 1-for-1, and I was going through creating my flow, and I've got, this has 1 row, this has 2 rows. So very quickly you can identify duplicate records and start trying to narrow that down. Now, if you look at the flow the way that Tableau has it built in the sample, you'll see that they've gone in and excluded nulls from the order ID field. There's a couple ways we can do it, but we'll do it the simple way, which was with the built-in function with these 3 dots here. There is a filter. I'll come here to null values, and I'll say I want to keep only non-null values. Now there's no nulls in there currently, but maybe as we're building this out, we're anticipating in the future there might be nulls in there, and we don't want them in the final data set. And then we can come up here and rename this to remove nulls. Sorry, can't see my keyboard. Remove nulls. Now they don't have descriptions on the sample flow, but I like to add them for every single step, because the more detail you add, the easier it is for adoption. And if somebody else is going to maintain it in the future, they can jump right in, understand what you were doing and why you were doing it. So we'll say keep only non-null records from the order ID field. Boom, there we go. So now it's very clear what this field is doing. I'll move these down. So now another thing that we can do just to kind of clean up the flow and keep it nice and clean is we can rename these. So we'll call this orders south and orders east, orders west, and order central. And again, this is just it's not necessary, but the cleaner your flows are, the easier it is to jump back into them, and it keeps it more uniform. And so for the east, we can jump in here. Now in the sample flow, what they've done is they've changed the discount type. It's not actually necessary. I don't know, they changed it to string, and there's some things in the sample flow that are really only done just to showcase here's some functionality that prep can do. And so that's why I kind of wanted to dig into rebuilding it to show what we should actually do if we were building out this data source. So we know that we're going to union these tables together. And in order to do that, we want our field types to be the same. So if I click back into the first one and go to this third option right here, it's show list view. This will just give me a list of the fields and their types in the view, and then if there's any changes, it'll quickly highlight those here. But for discount is a number, decimal number, that makes sense. So it should stay the same in this flow. Now sales, it's a string. And so if we look back at our profile, if I come over here, I can see that sales has these USD string values in there. We don't want that. But again, prep makes this very easy to clean. I can click on these 3 dots, go to clean, remove letters. And so now all of the letters have been removed. And if you wanted to see what that prep actually did, you can come over here, click on the edit button, and this is the calculation that it used. So it's just regular expression replace. So you could manually type it out if that's faster for you and you know what you're doing as you get more familiar with it. So it's always interesting to kind of get under the hood and see what prep did, but you can just click on that little menu function and it's there. The type is still string, so you can just click this and change it to a number decimal, and now it's the same. So come back here and say fix data type, and again, move letters from the sales field and change to number type. Boom. All right, now let's go to West. So for West, in the sample flow, you can see that they've renamed the states, but in the actual changes pane, it says the values were grouped. So another interesting thing that you can do, but actually before we do that, let me jump back real quick. When we union these together, we want all of the fields to be the same, uniform, and so we want to have the same number of fields. When we look at the first one, there's 21 fields. Second one, 21 fields. In the West table, there's 41 fields. And then if we look, we can see that there are these, there's all of these columns that have right underscore in front of them. So we don't need those. And so we can actually go and remove those in the input step. And so I can come here and all of them are checked right now, but I can start unchecking them to get them removed from the flow. And the reason why, if you're familiar with your data, it's good to make any sort of exclusions of fields or really any action transformation as early as you can in the flow, because once your organization starts using prep, maybe you've got prep conductor, you're scheduling flows, you're scaling with prep, flows run in order, they run one at a time. So the more simple that you can make your flows, the more performant you can make them, the better. So that's why if we do it earlier, it's not going to take as long to process because it's not processing those unnecessary fields throughout the rest of the flow. So cool. We've removed those fields. Now if I go back here, cool, we've got 21 fields. Okay, now we can go to the state renaming. So if I come over here to the right, the state field, it's got state abbreviations. But if we go back up to the first two, the east and the south sales, states are listed here with the full state name. Prep makes this super easy. Instead of having to do a really long if or case statement of if it's this abbreviation, do the full name, I can actually just come over here to the state field and just replace the name. So I can call that Arizona. So this makes it very easy and simple to replace these values. And so if there are situations where values are going to come in one way and we need to do a substitution for that, and it's always going to be that substitution, this is a real quick way to fix that. So type those here. It's going to take prep a second to catch up. This is also, as you're kind of working through these flows, the data sampling can be real important. When you bring in an input, automatically, if you go to here, data sample, it's going to take a default sample. And the method of quick select, what it tries to do is it tries to kind of take a look at the shape and the distribution of the values of the data and take a sample that makes the most sense, because prep loads every change that you do, any action, calculation, removal, it's loading as you're going through. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're working through it. And that data sample, that box is very important to keep in mind when you're trying to validate results, because it's not going to line up exactly since it's taking a sample unless you go into all of your inputs and click use all data. Your flow is going to take longer to run, but that will allow you to actually validate your results. Okay, so we renamed those states. We'll call this rename states. And we'll say rename the state abbreviations. Probably spelling that wrong. Cool, one more. All right, so for the central field, if you look at the sample, there's a lot of stuff going on there. But really, when we look at the rows, there's 24 fields here, so there's some extra fields. And when we look, we've got this order year, month, day, and ship year, month, day instead of an order date and a ship date field. So if we go back to this one, there is an order date field and a ship date field. Now in the sample, what they've done is they've turned each of those fields into a string. So they make one string calculation and wrap the order, the month, and the day in a string, and then add the slash mark in between. So they create the string field first, and I'll actually copy and paste that over here so we can see what that looks like. So this is what is in the sample. So they say, hey, we'll make this an order date. Cool. And now we've got this order date field. It's a string value. We can change the type to date. So that's the way it's done in the sample. But really the more efficient way to do this is to use the make date function. So we can come in here and say make date. And we've got our order year. Order year, order month, and order day. And this works well because those three columns are already a number type, and this calculation needs a number type to work right out of the box. So order year, month, day, that's our order date, save. And so in one step, we've done the same thing. So we don't have to go through and change the type. And so we can do the same thing for our ship date. And we'll say make date, order year, order month, and order day, ship, sorry. Ship year, ship month, and ship day. All right, so there is our ship date and our order date fields. So now that those are created, we don't really need the extra fields anymore. So we can come over here, go click, control and click these 6 fields because we don't need them. Come up here, remove fields. Boom. So those have been removed from the flow. If we take a look at our list view, let's make sure on types. So it looks like sales, quantity, and profit are all numbers. That's good, but discounts is a string. So let me go and make sure that there's no weird values in there. That's going to cause some errors. It looks like the only weird value is this none, but when we change this to a number, that's going to turn into null. And so we'll take this, turn it into a decimal. And there we go. Now we've got the same types. So I can come in here, call this fixed states. And again, with the descriptions, you can get as detailed or non-detailed as you want. So we'll say create a ship and order date and remove the unnecessary. And then change discount to number. I believe one of these fields is also named incorrectly. Yeah, so the product field and the first 3 tables, it is called product name. And so we want to match that up. And so let's call this, actually, you know what? We can take a preview at something real quick before we rename that. Let's do our union. So we can click here and you can either add the union step this way, or when you drag this on, it'll ask you if you want to join or union. So we'll do union. I'm also particular about the shape of my flows. You don't have to be. And so we can just drag all of those to our union. And now when we click on it, it's going to immediately highlight, here are fields that are mismatched. And so for discount, it looks like in the first 3 tables, it's matching up, but for the last table, it's actually called discounts. And then same for product. It was fine in the first 3, but in the last one, it's called product. So we need to change that to product name. And then there is no region field in the last table. So real quick, we can come in here, say region, and we know this is coming from the central region. So we can just call this central as a text value, save. And we can come over here. And we can do it this way, where we come in here and we rename the field here, which is probably the cleaner way to do it. But then if we come here, we know that discount and discounts are the same field. And so we could come over here and click the two fields and merge them. And they should merge as discount. Yep, there we go. So either way works. It's probably better practice to make sure that your names are lining up, but that's, again, the usefulness of prep. It's going to highlight all of these things really quickly for you. So we'll call this orders, or all orders. Oh, let's call it orders. Cool. Description, union, all order tables together. So next, there is a join happening to the returns table. So if we come here, here's our returns input. Let's drag that in. And it dropped down here. So I'll drag this up here real quick and we'll name it the same, returns all. And then when we look in the sample, they only included a few fields here. So just order ID, product ID, return reason, and notes. I believe those are the 4 fields. Yeah. So let's go into our clean. And what's happening in the sample is these notes are formatted as the reason first, then this hyphen, then the approver. And so to split those, there's a really easy function here. If it's up here, you can see automatic and custom split. And so we'll do custom split. We'll split on that hyphen. And then I want there could be more hyphens in there that I don't want to include. And so we'll just say I want the first 2 splits. So what that's going to do is it's going to give me the result, the string that comes before that hyphen and the string that comes after it. So, and then you can see here, if you want to pop the hood, it's just the trim and split function. And so it's just splitting it on that character and then trimming any extra leading or following spaces off of it. And so we've got that split. And so now we can rename this field approver. And we can rename this field return notes. We can take this original notes field and remove it. We no longer need it. But then if you look at the approver field, there's all of these records that aren't quite spelled exactly the same, but they should be the same. And so we can use Prep's grouping function. We can come in here to the 3 dots, go to group values. And I think we'll have the most success if we group them on spelling since they're so close in spelling. So we'll click that and boom, there you go. You can click in each one. It'll show you which of the values fell within the grouping. So nice and easy. We don't have to do any calculation. And you can also decrease or increase the strength of how it's processing those. So if you've got some really crazy spellings or numbers or some stuff happening in there, you might need to increase the strength. But if you increase it too much, it's going to start really kind of stretching on how it's grouping those values. So you can kind of play with that. And then you can also, if you needed to, manually include other records that need to be in there. So we've grouped. We'll call this split and group. Split the notes field and group all names to remove duplicates. Perfect. And so now, if you look at the sample flow, the join that's happening is highlighted as a right join. That's what that Venn diagram is. So since the right side is filled in with color, that's a right join. But I typically like to flow. This is more of a personal preference really, but I like to make sense of my flow. And so here are my inputs. They're all coming together here, and I want them to continue with that flow. This is my main table. Orders is my main table. So really, ideally, I would like it to be on the left side, just because that makes more sense as it's flowing through. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it on. And so now orders is going to be on the left side. If I come in here, so orders is on the left and the split in group is on the right, because I took that this orange pill and I joined it to the orders table. So that's why it put this one on the left and this one to the right. And so we want to do a left join. Also, just a real quick overview of the join types. You've got standard inner join, standard left, standard right. You've got full outer, but then a very useful one is you can do not inner. So this will highlight, here are all of the records that don't match on both sides, or you can do left only. So we're going to join on these, and any records that match are going to be excluded. We only want records from the left table that don't match the other one. So just a couple of interesting ways to solve some problems or to clean up your data dynamically with these other joins. So, but we want left join, and we want to join on product ID and order ID. And so what this down here is going to show, it's going to show our join summary. It's going to show how many rows were included from both tables and then how many were excluded. And so if there was a need for all of your rows to match up and you were doing an inner join, for example, and you saw all of these excluded rows, you can click on one of them. So we'll go back here real quick and let's click on the 22 excluded rows. And so it's going to bring those up immediately. And so now if I was trying to do some validation and find out why are these not showing up, I can take those and maybe query my database and try to figure out what's going on. Why aren't these joining up? So we will call this one orders plus returns. And we'll see, just gonna copy and paste this over for time's sake. All right, so here's our orders and return table. Now in the flow as well, you see this clean two-step, and all that's really happening there is there's some fields being removed and renamed. And the reason is because when I come here back into my join step, if I go to list view, we've got the colors here, which represent the color of where they came from. So this teal is coming from the union and this orange is coming from the returns table. And so since we're joining on product ID and order ID, there is this duplicate order ID and product ID coming from the returns table. Now in the sample flow, the duplicate fields are removed. So order ID field 1 is actually the order ID field coming from the orders table in the sample flow. And same for product ID. It's the product ID coming from the orders table in the sample flow. Now I know since we just did a left join, we're bringing in all records from the orders table and only the matching records from this return table. So I don't really need these two duplicate fields. I'm expecting there to be some nulls in them since this is coming from the right table, they're not all going to match. And so I'm just going to remove them here in the join step. So again, the simpler that you can make your flow, the more efficient it will be. And that is our Superstore data set. And if we look at it, here we go. You can see not every order had a return, but those that did have the approver and the notes in there. We've got our orders, we've got our states, everything lines up. So that is, really just a quick overview into what prep can do and engineering these data sets. One thing to keep in mind though, while it's very good and useful for engineering data sets, it's also extremely useful for validation. If you are going through the process of maybe changing the logic that forms a table, you can say, okay, here was the original logic. Let me connect to that. Let me connect to my new logic and see, connect using that not inner join, and that will highlight, hey, here are all of the records that no longer match because you implemented new logic. I use this all of the time for validation because instead of me having to make that logic change, then query it, then pull it up in Tableau and try to visualize and see, okay, the numbers are off and dig in that way, I can just do it like this and dig in before I actually make any changes. So, prep is powerful on both ends for creating the data, but for validating the data and to also really understand what you need to do to create your data set. It forces you to spend that time with it. And you can more quickly visualize, when you've got a bunch of different sources of data. Since I've used prep before, I kind of have become a little bit familiar with some of those nuances. I know what I want this end state to be. And so all of the steps in between are just a matter of getting to that end state. So, it also, when you've spent time building a data set, as you go through these steps, you see some of that distribution, you see these fields, the way they're formatted. So by the time you take this output, throw it in the desktop, you kind of already have an idea of what you can do with it. and how it's going to be most effective. One last caveat to be careful of. One of the benefits of prep is that you can sort of pre-aggregate your data and make it to where in desktop you're not connecting to all of this data at the most granular level. If you don't need it, you get more performant workbooks, but there is always the danger of over aggregating and like doing percentage calculations directly in the data set. Now they're probably not going to aggregate properly in desktop unless you're filtering to that level of granularity. Or maybe you're calculating an average in the data set, and now when you throw it into desktop, you're doing an average of an average. So just be cautious not to over aggregate. Do as much as you can, get it to where Tableau maybe just handles that final aggregation to make sure that any filtering or actions are going to aggregate properly. But yeah, that's just one thing to be cautious of, because there's always the urge to make the data set as small and compact as possible, but then you lose some of the power of desktop in doing that. But yeah, I hope I was able to get in depth enough and you were able to follow along if you wanted to. Yeah, there's plenty of potential for prep and plenty of ways to grow with it. One thing I will leave you with, it's not a fancy slide or anything, but this is just a quote that has resonated very well with me, and I'll just throw it up here for y'all. It's a quote from Stephen Covey. Anytime you jump into learning something, you can put some pressure on yourself, and you can start to be, really sort of be your worst advocate sometimes and talk yourself down. So when you're learning something, be patient with yourself. Give yourself the opportunity to be proud of whatever pace you learn it at. That's all I have for y'all.
Jay, this is awesome, man. I learned a bunch.
Yeah, that was awesome. And I love your quote.
Yes, it's like I said, it's definitely one that resonated with me. There was a couple times when I did my 100-day challenge where life got busy and I was like, oh man, I might miss a day. And so now it's not technically 100 days, but I just started realizing I'm really doing this for me, to learn for me. And so as long as I'm proud of the progress I'm making, that's okay. It's okay that sometimes stuff gets in the way, but I'm still making that effort. I'm not giving up. I'm still learning.
Exactly.
Love that.
So we've got a question for you, Jared, real quick. How does Tableau Prep stack up against other tools like an Alteryx, Airflow, any other tools, like how, in your opinion?
For me, I think one of the right off the bat is if you Tableau desktop, if that's your tool of choice, your visualization tool, it just integrates really well with it. It integrates with they've got Prep Conductor and the data management add-on, so it integrates with the environment well. And also, I think the most powerful thing that the advantage for Prep is this this profile pane, right? Being able to directly see the distribution and kind of when you're doing joins, quickly identifying duplicates. That's where the advantage is for me. And also, when you compare it to tools like Alteryx, there are some things that you can do in Prep in one step that in Alteryx takes you, maybe 3 or 4 steps to do. Now, for ease of maintainability or transferring hands, that might be better, depending on the organization. But for me, it's an advantage because I can kind of work through it faster. But like I said, there's still a lot of disadvantages of Prep too. There's definitely room for it to catch up, especially when you think about, yes, it integrates well with Tableau, but it doesn't always integrate well with other things. So that's just one of the sort of disadvantages of it at the moment.
Yeah, it was awesome. I loved there were some parts where you were kind of redoing fields and kind of reconnecting things, and like to your point, there was like, oh, that's really simple right there. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, there's definitely room to appreciate it for sure. And I think the other thing I would say too is there are definitely use cases I've seen where if the transformation is not just like an enterprise level and you're not trying to do things on, really small headways or real time. There's some really nice use cases when you pair prep with Tableau Conductor on the server, where it's like, it's going to run it for you. And like Tableau's ability to handle the drivers and stuff like that is it's a lot better than some other tools and whatnot that are out there. So there's definitely advantages to be had.
And yeah, and I would say one last advantage as well over maybe some of the other tools is learning curve. We've heard it from a few people that I tried Tableau Prep and I tried Alteryx, and I really like Alteryx, but Tableau Prep was just quicker for me to learn.
Cool.
So that's another thing out there.
Love that.
Yeah, I would add that if your data is in a database and you're outputting to Tableau, either Tableau Server or Tableau Online, then Tableau Prep is perfect. If you need to go pull an API and run some advanced analytics and then output it to somewhere else, or a certain file type other than CSV or Hyper, then yeah, Alteryx would win that battle. So
yeah, and I think especially they've talked about really increasing the development arm of Prep and opening that up the same way that we have extensions in desktop. They want to open up extensions in Prep and really give any developers control over the UI itself. And so we may see some things like API connectors come out of that. I would imagine the community would jump on that and start making up for areas where Prep hasn't always served the need.
That's cool.
I love the visual nature of Prep.
Yeah, that's why I said
visualization, the interactivity.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm very particular about how my flows look, but I know that it doesn't really matter because when you close it out and open it up, it's probably going to rearrange everything anyways. But it's just nice to be able to visually make sense of here's how the data is flowing.